Hello, everyone. Welcome to another office hour. This is Dr. Claire Moon, and we're going to be talking about astrology yet again. So, welcome back if you're here again. If you're new, welcome for the first time. We do have a chat over on the side of your screen. And right now, there's about a 20-second delay. So, if you do show up live and you are here in the chat, I'm going to be checking in really, really regularly. That's why I'm here. Usually I'm not as good as at checking in on the chat during forecasts that I have a couple times a month, but here, that's why we're here. So I do have a bunch of topics queued up. If anyone has any questions, of course, please put them in the chat, ask them. Of course, as is tradition, I have misset my microphone. So, uno momento. Oh, yeah. Ooh. So the first thing, I'm just going to get down to it. The first thing I want to talk about today, if my screen will share, here we are. And PS, I guess, maybe before I do that, if you're new, I do more Hellenistic astrology. I'm not always versed on more modern evolutionary, there's so many traditions of astrology, Uranian astrology. There's so many that I don't know very much about. But sometimes if I don't know the answer or the topic that you're talking about, or I don't have a response, I can usually think of at least one other astrologer that maybe would, so I can do a referral or defer. But mostly Hellenistic, more ancient astrology in terms of where quote unquote Western astrology comes from. That's what my main focus is today. Um, anyway, let me share my screen. So the first question comes from Amelie, and they were wondering about the difference between Davison charts and composite charts and what these are. If you know, you know. If those are new terms for you, a Davison chart and a composite chart, they're just ways that we squish two people's charts together into a relationship chart. So this is something that we use for what we call synastry. Synastry is just a fancy word for relationship astrology. And so, of course, we all have a birth chart, right? We were all born in a moment, and even our relationship has its own chart. And that can show us, I mean, it depends on what your metaphysics are. It depends on what you believe about stuff. But the chart, the relationship chart, can show you how the relationship functions. You can watch transits to some of these things and see in real time what the sky is kind of reflecting about where the relationship is in real time. Some people, depending on, getting a little bit more abstract, you can start to look at, if you feel like the relationship has a certain purpose, or, even more practically, what the strengths and the weaknesses are of the relationship. So there's so much information in there, very, very similarly to how we treat a birth chart. So there's so much information in there. So I wanted to give a couple examples and just speak very vaguely about the difference between them. So the question was, what is the difference between a couple versions of these? So I'm going to show you, and we're going to call upon dear Martha Stewart, of course. If you know me, that's one of I'm starting just now as I'm late to the game. I should have more celebrity examples, but I really don't. So what we can do with synastry or relationship astrology, of course, is we can just very comparatively put the charts against one another. We can even flip-flop them to exchange who is in the middle, from the perspective of whose rising sign. But we can do a lot of comparison, just putting the two charts in a biwheel. Another way of looking at these things would be, and I feel like it makes a difference, at least to me. Let me see here. I don't know if I can share this, but sometimes what I'll do, well, is I will get two charts kind of, I'm going to show you what my screen looks like, but I'll get the two charts kind of side by side and really, you know, look at them like, and this kind of helps us see in a different way the differences between two different people, right? So that's kind of where I usually start with synastry, at least, is just comparisons. But then another thing that we can do is I can do a subsidiary chart. Allegedly, that's the word that we're using. And let me make sure you can see this too. Whoa. Nope, that's Inception. That's not what I want to share. I'll just share my whole screen. So I'm going to go into subsidiary. So if I'm using AstroGold. AstroGold is my software of choice. And this is going to look different depending on the software that you're using. But we can see here, I've pulled up some options to squish together Priscilla Presley and Martha Stewart's charts. I don't think they know each other, but let's just say they did. What would that be like? And I can choose composite, and it says right here, it's right here. It says midpoints. And so that's the first thing with composite charts. And so let me calculate that. Now we've got a relationship chart. We've got what is, and so for each planet and each point in each of these two people's separate charts, the software has calculated the midpoint between each of those things. So the midpoint between your Mars and my Mars, or Priscilla's Mars and Martha's Mars, right? Now, what one consequence is of this chart is that because it's just calculated based on midpoints between planets and ascendants and things, it doesn't always reflect like a real sky at the moment, at like any given moment. So the composite chart doesn't necessarily reflect like a real actual sky that happened, versus the Davison chart, which we will get to, which is named after a dude I think it was a dude. I guess I'm assuming their last name was Davison. That is based on a calculation that ends up being actually like a sky at a moment. So depending on, now this is kind of our first differential factor of, okay, do you care about midpoints? Or do you use, because there's actually like whole branches of astrology that use midpoints, and I don't know much about them yet, at least at this part of my journey. But if you're into that, then using the composite chart for relationships makes a lot of sense for you. If that seems a little bit abstract or out there and you want to focus more on the Davison chart, which is calculating it in terms of, bringing two charts together in what would be like a location between the two people's birthplaces, that is actually based on the real sky. So if you're more into that notion, then maybe Davison charts are more for you. So you can kind of base it on that. To be frank, I've looked at both of them. I've used both of them in my own life, in the life of clients. They both work. So very, very similar to a lot of astrological things. A lot of it works, and it's just going to be a different perspective. Now, I have heard some people say that like one shows you more like the meaning and purpose of the relationship. The other one shows more like the lived experience of the relationship. I kind of personally think we can see all of that in all of the charts all the time. Like, I don't think it really matters like how we're calculating it. I think we can see meaning and purpose. We can see the lived experience, all of that, no matter how we're doing the math. But it depends on what you're observing out there when you are using both of these different types of relationship charts. So composite charts are based on midpoints. The Davison chart, however, now what that does is finds a space. So for instance, Martha Stewart's born in New Jersey and Priscilla Presley was born in Brooklyn. And so the Davison chart is going to find, and this is as far as I understand it, it's going to find a location in between those two spaces and then find the date in between their two birthdays and then cast a chart from that point of view. So metaphysically speaking, doesn't make a lick of sense to me. I'm gonna be real. Like just looking at like a midpoint between where two people were born and then like the time in between their two birth times. I mean, I guess I can make some kind of, I don't know, kind of maybe intuitive argument, which is valid. But yeah, I've sat here for a while now, for weeks, trying to think about like, does that feel resonating to me? Does that make sense? Just like in an intuitive way. And like, I mean, maybe. I guess it probably depends on the person. So, but here's the thing is that I have over time preferred the Davison chart for myself. So, there's no right answer here. Davison versus composite chart. Both of them are great. I think this is a call for all of us to kind of try things out. Well, hold on a sec. But yeah, I tend more toward the Davison. So let's look at that. And so now here's the Davison chart between these two. So quite a bit different. So if I just bring up the composite and the Davison, and we can kind of see the difference between the two. I mean, there's clearly differences. Some similarities, but not quite the same. We got Venus in a different place. We've got Jupiter in slightly different places. The moon is in a different place. So this is where, just like when we look at like a person with different house systems, or if I'm looking at a person or a natal chart between like Jyotish Indian astrology versus Western astrology, it's like, okay, if you're this, it's like getting the different view. Like here I can see the nutritional label. On the other side, I can't, but it's all still on the same can. So we can see all of it from different points of view. So yeah, this is just like that. So there's no right or wrong answer, but that's kind of the base differences as I understand them with my kind of bare minimum research and really not not looking into like the in-depth calculations. Like I couldn't tell you exactly how it's calculated beyond what I've explained today. But hopefully that's enough to kind of help people nudge you into one direction or another, or just into exploring this topic, at all. So yeah, that was question number 1 that I wanted to answer. Hello, Reverend Kai, welcome. We've got another astrology friend in the house. Yeah, it looks like they look at composite charts. They find them really useful, especially when using harmonics and divisional charts. And see, this is where I'm like, I know there's whole branches of astrology that are into midpoints and stuff where that's much more of a regular part of their toolbox. And so that might make a lot more sense for, whatever kind of angle you're coming in from. So that's perfect. Thank you so much for giving a specific example, because I didn't know those words. All right. Another question here. And this is also from Amelie, just kind of asking about the basics of elections, which is like, kind of seems absurd to try to distill anything down into a quick response, but I can give some quick and dirty things that I use in my practical life from electional astrology. And I think there was kind of the notion in our exchange that like, yeah, elections are hard. They are. They're difficult. You are trying to juggle like at least 4 balls all at the same time. And the wind is blowing, and so you got to work with that. And so it's not simple. So just to validate, if you're out there and you're learning electional astrology and it is proving to be quite the kind of tedious, difficult task, yes, you are correct. You're not imagining it. So yeah, electional astrology. So that is when we basically try to find auspicious or really good times to do stuff and things, when to embark on journeys, when to begin a project. Anytime, like, just as a birth chart is a moment in time, we can cast a chart for anything, right? So we can cast a chart for a moment, for an event, for a project, a job, anything. So electional astrology is the art and science of choosing the best times to do stuff. And then we get into this interesting discussion, and this is so a little separate aside here is that there's different types of time. So recently I've been reading about the difference between Chronos type of time, the concept of time, versus Kairos. And Chronos time is more linear time, like very calendrical, Gregorian calendar, like January comes before June. etc., linear time, how we experience time in some ways, right? Chronos. And I think a lot of times that's what we're looking at in our lives. And then we have Kairos type of time, which is more about like seizing the moment, being in the moment that is here right now. And part of the kind of experience with Kairos or practicing with Kairos would be when to do the right things at the right times, or I should say the best times to do that thing based on what that thing is and the kind of outcomes that we want. And so are we trying to play God? A little bit. Are we are we kind of, this, if you're someone who already is clinging pretty tightly to the steering wheel of life, trying to kind of control every outcome and every conversation or whatever, do not pick up elections. It is going to push you over the edge because I am projecting. It's me. I am that person. I have a Mars in Scorpio. I'm always strategically trying to like, even like today, I was mowing the lawn right before this, and I saw the shadow of the day from the trees. The sun was starting to set, so I was kind of in a hurry to get it done. And I decided to start mowing from the shadow side so that it had less time to get wet and get dew on it. And I was kind of chasing the sun a little bit. So even like little stupid things like that, I am just strategically doing. So when I'm doing elections, it's really kind of activating that. So if you have that too, beware, buyer beware. But it can be a really effective way of navigating life, knowing a good time to do things. So for instance, I was just looking at the weather right now. I had an option of doing a few different tasks, and I decided it looked like lawn mowing o'clock. For me, let me back it up. I'm an Aquarius rising, so let's pretend like this is me right now. Uh, and I'm going to start using the vanishing pen. I'm going to do it. I think it makes things better. Okay. So for me, in Aquarius rising, I've got Mars in my fourth house of my home. Uh, and Mars chops and cuts stuff. And so it felt like today, especially if I'm trying to redirect, if I believe in sympathetic magic, I'm trying to redirect this Mars and Uranus energy. And so one of the things that I did was, okay, well, how can I, do cutting in my home? Okay, I'm going to go mow the lawn and then do it differently. Do something about it that is a departure from the regular routine of things. And so I actually set the lawnmower blade a setting lower, and I did that. So that was the new way of using Mars in my backyard. And it felt like, I was looking at all the different things I could do. And there were some other tasks that at the moment just, that wasn't what the moment called for. Um, so this was earlier today. And there were other things where it's like, I don't want Mars being part of whatever that is that I want to do. So that's more Kairos, and that's where elections and electional astrology come in. So I'm going to give you kind of some of um, my quick and dirty things that I'm always kind of doing with astrology. So first things first is looking at the moon. Of course, we always want the moon to be in good shape. And I'm not going to get into what good shape is. That's for everyone out there to learn when you learn how to do electional astrology. We can have a whole set of lectures just about how to get the moon into a good position. And it really depends on what you're doing. But okay, so earlier today, there was a moon in an earth sign in Virgo. And there later today is going to be a moon in Libra. If I have more kind of practical, tedious, smaller, finer detail type tasks to do, I'm going to choose when the moon is in Virgo versus if I have more social things to do, like I'm going to call my mom at some point tonight. I'm going to wait till the moon is in Libra when maybe I'm feeling more social. Love my mom. Of course, we have a very stereotypical relationship where she gets on my nerves sometimes. Boy, can I handle it better when the moon is in Libra. I'm very much more cool-headed. So yeah, it's like looking at the moon. Where is the moon? Does it fit? Not even looking at if the moon is good or bad or not, or whatever we want to get into with our technical details, but just looking like, does the moon fit? I do a lot of similar things with planetary hours. If I'm having a hard time deciding which task to do, I'll base it on what planetary hour it is. Is it Venus hour? Okay, I'm going to go clean. Is it Mercury hour? I'm going to go right. Is it Mars hour? I'm going to go mow the lawn, you know? So there are these ways where we can follow the sky in that way. Um, Another big thing with elections, is it a waxing moon or a waning moon? That is going to tell you a lot about what is the best thing to do with that type of energy. And so if it's a waxing moon, that's a good time to build, like right now. So waxing moon, good time to grow, build, work on stuff. If, say, the moon was in Gemini, then really waning moon, good time to wrap things up, good time to not start new projects necessarily, a good time to rest and start recuperating and regrouping from the whole last 4 weeks, you know? So you can look at where the moon is even in their cycle, and that can kind of tell you what are good things to align with the weather right now. Um, or if you're trying to elect for, you know, it's really funny. In some of the books, they're always taught, there's like a whole section about building mills or destroying mills, deconstructing a mill. So do you want to build a mill or deconstruct it? Because those are different. We want different weather for those different tasks to turn out in their most optimal outcome. Uh, okay. I also don't want Mars on the descendant unless I want an argument or tension or prickliness, even unintended prickliness. Now, maybe Mars is on the descendant and you're talking about you're having healthy conflict or confronting something or whatever it is. But Mars on the descendant, you know, if I'm sending like, I don't know, if I'm calling my mom, I'm not going to do it with Mars on the descendant. And what's kind of interesting too is like when I'm electing for marriages, which I'm kind of getting away from, so don't ask me to elect for your marriage because it stresses me out too much. I'm going to refer you to like Kyra Ryberg or uh Cameron Cassidy or someone like that to do your marriage elections, but they do talk about having the midheaven is what is between the two people. So when I'm looking at the midheaven in an electional chart and I'm kind of, you know, I'm electing something that involves another person, what is on the midheaven as well? I don't really want Mars on the midheaven or the descendant. Uh, if I need to be assertive and direct, I might put Mars on the rising, but only if I'm in a safe space, you know, for me and my body and all that. So yeah, Mars, watch out for them, especially if it's daytime. If the sun is above the horizon, Mars is spicier versus, you know, right now, Mars is below or sorry, oh no, not yet. The sun has not set. Once the sun sets below the horizon, Mars becomes mitigated. So that's another thing too, is sometimes if you want to deal with Mars stuff or try to get them kind of quieted down in your electional chart, wait till the sun sets. The other thing is, I mean, of course, and I'm just going to rattle these off now. I'm going to get into these too much, but in general, you want the ruler of the chart to be in good condition and strong. And you want the moon. Oh, we should have said this with the moon. Moon applying to benefics is generally good. There's some special rules for buying and selling that are kind of counterintuitive in my opinion. But for the most part, when the moon is applying to a benefic like Venus or Jupiter, we like that. That's usually what we're going for. We want the ruler of the rising sign to be in good shape as well. And then finally, ideally, we have the malefics, and mostly the malefic contrary to sect in a cadent house. So either the 12th, the 3rd, the 6th, or the 9th. We want them falling away from the angles. That's what we want. We want to see them falling away from the angles. So that anytime a planet is on the cadent, kind of falling away from the side of the angle, that means that they're losing power. So we usually, now there are always exceptions to this stuff. Sometimes there's an election where you want to actually highlight Mars or Saturn and you want them to be really prominent in the chart for really good reasons. Most general purpose elections, that's not the case, and we kind of want to tuck them away. So yeah, that was a lot of things. That was like 5 or 6 things right there that are kind of my basic foundational, like these are mostly my non-negotiables, and I got to get a lot of these things checked off for me to say, this is a chart I feel good about giving someone to do a thing and for it to turn out well. And it's pretty difficult. And so what you'll notice is that, at least in my more Hellenistic style, and maybe this is a cop out, but I kind of feel like if I start, and granted, I'm never going to elect something like this, like Mars and Uranus conjunct in a chart. I would never do that. But like, for instance, I was doing some elections. We had a year where Jupiter was with Uranus. Um, yeah, that's fine. I'll take a benefic with Uranus. I'll take my chances with that, because if we really start to narrow ourselves down so much, we're never going to find a date. We're never going to find something. So this is where we really have to exercise our Virgo and Pisces axes and be like, okay, here are all the billion details, but which ones are the most important? Prioritize which ones are the most important. Let's not have Mars on an angle in a day chart, right? For most purposes. That's so we're really prioritizing that Pisces kind of wider view. What is actually important in the final outcome? And it's really easy with elections, I think, to get lost in the weeds, get lost in the Virgoan details of the thing, but finding some kind of in between. So very many times, last thing I'll say about elections, just to validate people who are working on this skill, is that, yeah, if you're finding it like you're having to make these really difficult concessions and be like, oh my gosh, like, yeah, that's why they're so difficult. And I think some of the best electional astrologers are able to just be really brave and actually be like, all right, well, I'm going to prioritize this and it's not perfect weather, but here you go and good luck. And I guess it's kind of like one of my favorite anecdotes was there was some court astrologer like hundreds of years ago who was electing a marriage for a royal couple and basically made them wait for like 5 years because the weather was not good. The thing is that most people aren't willing to wait 5 years. And so what I was realizing for my own practice of electional astrology, and this is why I haven't been offering it, is that I get too Virgo. I can't let go. I can't let go. And it's yeah, it's hard for me to just hand that over and be like, yeah, good luck, buddy. So yeah, electional astrology. Good luck. Yeah, and I kept wanting to tell people, if it were up to me, if I were your parent, which I'm not, and I'm electing this like because I really care about people. So if I'm electing something for you, I'm electing it for you like I would elect it for myself. And so it's hard for me to kind of separate myself and be like, if I were looking at a marriage and I had this chart they had this chart and all of it together. And ideally for me, I would wait 5 years because that's how I am. Not everyone is on that same timeline. And sometimes they're not on that timeline for very real reasons, not just, like, having kids and the culture that you're in and parental expectations and even like legal expectations. Like sometimes you can't wait. And so okay, you get this time range and you got to just do your best to pick the best time within that time range. Just do your best. So that is my electional spiel. Let me see if there's any questions. Otherwise, I'll go to my next topic. Hello, Elliot. Welcome. Yeah. Reverend Kai says elections are tedious and require a lot of patience. Electional astrology search engines at AstroSeek are accessible and helpful. See, this is why I love doing this. It's just like when I leave my house and I learn things and I talk to people and I learn things. I didn't know they had that. The future is now. I feel like this is what I felt like when I learned that like in calculus, like you can use derivatives to find a function or whatever. It's like, what? They've had this the whole time? Are you kidding me? Oh, that's so cool. Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. Well, thank you for that nugget of wisdom. So Kai is saying with crunch timed weddings, so like when, it's like, yeah, we got to do this. We can't just wait around for 5 years because my astrologer says so. Um, Kai will often recommend that they do vow renewals to help shore up not wonderful elections. So like picking a later date than the wedding, a beautiful later date to renew your vows on, and then kind of laying that overlay of election on top of the one underneath it that was done earlier. Yeah, that's a beautiful remediation. Yeah, go to Reverend Kai. They'll do. Right? Yeah, I confirmed that before, but yeah, because I need to really just like take it off my website and put my referral list because I don't think I'm ever going to go back to doing them anytime soon. Um, all right. I'm going to answer this other great question here. Unaspected planets, wondering how they function in a natal chart, especially when the planet in the chart, especially when the planet is the chart ruler. Sign-based aspects apply, but wondering more specifically. Yeah, let's fiddle around here. So, okay, let's throw out Martha Stewart here. Unaspected planets. Let's see if they have any. Some charts don't, everything's aspecty. And I guess, yeah, let's see what you were saying here. Aspects apply. Yeah, so that's the thing is like sign-based aspects. I mean, if a planet isn't getting any sign-based aspects, that is going to be the most extreme version of this situation. And then it's like you think about what it's like to not have relationships with other people, have a difficulty in getting guidance, resourcing, whatever resourcing means to you. Yeah, that's a difficult position for any planet. And this is actually what happens with the void of course moon. And so depending on the orbs that you use, that's going to define whether or not the planet is in aspect or not. If we're going then by degree-based stuff, that our most common version of that is the void of course moon. And similar to, any other situation, when the moon is not making any aspects with any other planets, the moon is not really like able to, there's not much to bounce off of. It's like not having energy to bounce off of or work with. And it's hard to have the outcome of that chart end up kind of like the cake is not going to look like the picture. It's harder to make at least material world things happen. Like that's a moon thing. The moon has a harder time kind of making themselves effective in the chart when they're not aspected with anything else. It's not totally, so if you have a void of course moon in your birth chart, it's not like you're totally unable to make a life for yourself. I'm sure you are, but it can be a bit harder. I assume the same is true for any other planet you find that is not in any kind of sign-based aspect with it, something. So yeah, I guess that's what I have to say about that. If it's like degree based, I mean, it's harder for, personally. I mean, I see sign based stuff be so important that it's not that I'm not using degrees, I totally am. But as long as there's a sign based aspect, that planet is getting support. Even if they're separating, even, maybe it's a little less than, but there's still a lifeline. They're still able to have that conversation in a sign-based aspect. So even if by degree it's pretty out of orb, I still think they're probably getting some help. So I guess, wondering more specifically, if you have any more specifically parts of that question, please let me know. But yeah, and like, so for instance, let's just pretend like the moon didn't have an aspect with anything in Virgo. The moon can still see into a place too. So that's another thing to consider is that the way that the Greeks were kind of conceptualizing their optics theory was that these planets were shooting out rays like from their eyes, basically. And those rays were able to interact with that place. They were able to bear witness to that place. Now, was there a planet there able to receive that witnessing? No, but there's still a connection, even if there's no planet in there. So there's still a lot of functions and things happening, even if there's not quite the like super great partile degree based stuff happening. I hope that helps. Um, yeah, okay, great. Thank you. Everyone go to Reverend Kai for your elections. Go to them. Yeah, and then Cameron Cassidy's great for those. Tall is great. T-A apostrophe A-L. They're great for elections. There's lots of really good people out there. Wingtip Astrology, I believe. Yeah, Emily Wapnick. They're great. They do elections. So yeah, lots of good options out there. Um, mm. Oh, and another thing too. I mean, all the minor sympathies. So that's a good thing to consider too. If you have a planet that's not in a certain like degree-based or even sign-based aspect, look to things like Antisha, Contra Antisha, um, God, like the hearing and perceiving and commanding and obeying, and like there's all these minor sympathies. So just because it's not an aspect relationship, there can be some other minor ones that might connect those planets in ways that we wouldn't have expected otherwise. One of the metaphors I have for it, like if two planets are in contra Antisha or something like, or sorry, Antisha, do you have anything? Not quite. A lot of spirit in the moon in this chart right here, if this is a person. Like that's, oh no, that is, never mind. No, oh, I'm not gonna, but just take my word for it. If there's a contra Antisha, it's like having a shitty tin can telephone. That's what like remember when we were kids and they would have us, maybe that they didn't do this in other places, but we actually made them. And I think it was a physics thing because like the vibration sent the sound. So if you've got like a tin can telephone. So that's kind of how I think of minor aspects or minor sympathies where like the planets are in two signs that have the same ascensional time or similar ascensional times or have the same amount of light at that time of year, either or darkness. So there's some minor stuff to consider. Okay, next topic. What shall I choose? Those were all kind of the main ones I wanted to definitely make sure I got to. I did notice, all right, so just some little anecdote here. Can I share this? Yes, I can. Okay. So this is a chart that I have for when I put on a headlamp when I was camping. So at the end of June, I was camping and at it's about 9:15. And at that point, the descendant was at 16 degrees. The sun was at 5. So the sun was 9 degrees below the horizon. And there was still a little bit of twilight, but it was dark enough that we were all starting to put on headlamps. And that is very similar to what I experienced while driving. Whenever the sun starts to get approximately 5 to 9 degrees, it's like we're definitely, and that's, give or take, right? We're definitely putting on our headlights, putting on our headlamps. Not everyone, but most people are doing it. And so this question, which has come up before of like, okay, if the sun is right below or above the horizon, sunset babies, sunrise babies, right before sunset, after sunset, before sunrise. Is there kind of an ambiguity to that in terms of sect? Are you a day baby or a night baby? And I love to, because this was, anciently such a visual thing where people were watching the sky night after night after night. I like to think, all right, yeah, your sun is maybe close to the descendant or ascendant, but what was it like outside? Was it light out? Sun slightly above the horizon? Not that ambiguous to me. Definitely day baby. But if the sun is slightly below the horizon and there's ambiguity in like headlamps and headlights, I'm like, can we really rely on the benefics and malefics to behave like we expect them to based on sect? And I think the question becomes more foggy. So this was just yet another thing, and I thought it was funny because I had experienced it with headlights, but I had not experienced it with headlamps. And here we are. So yeah, I thought that was cute. What else? Mm. Oh, this is way out there, um, time-wise. Sorry, hold on. I need to check something off a list. Okay. Um, but March of 2025 looks bananas. And it is on my Jupiter in Aries in the third house. As a treat, I am letting myself tell people way too soon. So I just want to like have us all avert or turn our eyes toward, yeah, avert your eyes, maybe, to March of 2025. And what I found is that there's four Hellenistic grade void of course moons and two eclipses. And I was like, are you kidding me? That's way too many. AstroSeek, void of course, moon, calculator. I want to share this with you. Okay, we pick Hellenistic. We look at 2025. So like looking at 2024, and okay, there's a few different definitions for void of course moons. If we go to like Chris Brennan has a really nice thing in his astrology dictionary online. You just type in astrology dictionary, it'll probably bring it up. But there's the more Renaissance-y definition that I think more of us are familiar with, where when the moon isn't going to make any more aspects in that sign before it leaves for the next one, then that can be void of course, depending on orbs that you're using and planets. But then once it gets into the next sign, then the moon is out of that situation. Here, the moon can go through signs and still be void of course, and it has to not make any aspects within 30 degrees. And so it's really rare that it happens. And it usually happens like once or twice a year. This year in 2024, we had one in February. And when the moon goes 30 entire degrees without making an aspect, in this case with a visible planet, so that's the other thing is I'm not using Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. So this is kind of not as special if you are using those things. But if you're me, and I kind of figure these are the more industrial strength void of course moons where, it's not a great time to do material world stuff. Great time to do like spiritual kind of downtime stuff, but the cake is not going to turn out like the picture. But look at 2025. Okay. Holy cow. What in the world? Who ordered this? Can you believe this? So yeah, March 10th through the 13th, the 16th through the 18th, the 25th through the 27th, the 30th through the 1st of April. And then there's one that stretches over the new year. But yeah, four of them in March. And then we also have eclipses in March. And so if you're planning stuff, speaking of elections, if you are planning stuff, uh, March is it's a bit of a needle to thread, in my opinion. It feels like slalom skiing. I'm like going in between these dates, trying to, pick when the good time to do things is. So I just want to put that on your calendar if you're someone that likes to use astrology this way. Keep that one on your date. Tell your clients, hey, March is a good time to take a vacation, is a good time to like get back to your familiar routines and take care of yourself, do self-care, do downtime stuff where we're just kind of focusing on the intimate nature of the moon and not necessarily out there trying to like bring down the effluences of Mars and Saturn and getting shit done and stuff. So, anyway, March 2025. There's also eclipses. I'm not going to get into that right now, but there's also those, and they're a whole different little animal, but also not necessarily unless you're making really big changes. Eclipse energy can be kind of wild to imbue into something. Okay, so I wanted to tell you about that. Um, oh, eighth house keywords put on my radar. So the eighth house, I'm usually talking about like one of the things in like the bucket of death topics is like living wills, advance directives, safety deposit box keys, power of attorney, all of the legal kind of logistical stuff that happens around end of life topics. Another way to say that is estate planning and administration. Eighth house, estate planning and administration. I'm guessing there's probably some tie-ins with the fourth, but I was like, oh yeah, that's a keyword for the eighth house. That makes sense. Other shower thoughts? Just rapid fire now. Okay, so you know how like very sadly the 27 club for people is like a lot of times when people are in their Saturn return, which is around between 27 and 30, they go through a rough time and a lot of times they don't always make it out alive. The 27 club, or it's just a random horrible accident, you know, 27 club. If you know, you know. If you don't, sorry, come tune back in a few minutes. Okay, what about animals though? What about dogs? And I don't want to scare anyone, but if dogs are like, what is it? Like 7 dog years for every 1 human year, does that mean that like the age of 4 for pets is like the 27 club year where we got to get these pets to like age 5 and then they're going to be fine? Just throwing it out there as a potential thing. Someone needs to do a study. Uh, oh yeah, this is a good thing to talk about. Okay, I talked about the void of course moon. Let me see if there's any comments or questions. Yeah, so going back to the unaspected planets or the planets that just aren't connecting with the ruler of their sign, remember to look at the exalting ruler. So whatever planet exalts in that sign, look to the bound lord. So we can look to that. So like let's bring up the complicated wheel. Um, or the triplicity lords. So for instance, let's just say that right now in this chart, Mars was not able to see Mercury for some reason. Um, we could then look, oh, well, I guess Mercury is their own bound lord here. So they would be able to maybe more rely on themselves. But the bound lord, the triplicity lord. So for a night chart, this would be like fire. I believe it's Jupiter. Can Jupiter see them? Can the triplicity lord see them? Can their bound lord see them? Uh, Decan lord, they're pretty low on the power scale. So I don't know how much they can actually help. Depends on what your philosophy is around dignities and all that stuff. But yeah, there's other rulers that can help the planet, and also just the other planets. So like if you have an unaspected planet, that well I guess and I this is all kind of I'm talking degree based. If it's not a degree based connection or a sign based connection with the ruling planet of that sign, but I guess again if we're going back to like the worst case scenario where that planet isn't making any aspects to anything else, which again like I don't know what this person's birthday is, but that seems like crazy. There's got to be some sign based stuff. And again, like there's got to be something that I guess it's not that I don't believe you, but I guess I must just have a more liberal view of astrology. I just have a hard time believing that there's nothing. Um, yeah. Oh, dang. See, this is why I brought it up. So going back to the pets, if it's every 7 years of dog years is 1 human year, then do they also profect faster? Like 4/7? Yeah, with all of the different types of timings. 27 club, fourth house perfection year. Fourth house does have to do with death sometimes. Yes. So someone do a study. Uh, astrology shower thoughts. Okay. What else? So yeah, Jupiter is currently in Gemini. I have just been seeing a lot of really nice stuff with that in terms of like, yeah, in my personal fifth house, I have had a lot of opportunities for fun. It's been a good time. I notice I'm coloring again. I'm playing more games. Like there's definitely expansion in my fifth house and it is feeling really, really good. Um, just letting everyone know again, as we come into August, don't get yourself too overextended. Jupiter and Gemini can be a little dicey, a little unreliable in terms of the growth and the expansion. It might be a little touch and go in here and there. So just let it be. That's totally fine. As long as we're not saying yes to everything. And I did want to touch on Mercury retrogrades for a second because we do have one coming up in August. Remembering that retrogrades are sometimes a redirection of the house topics that Mercury rules. So we can always look at a Mercury retrograde in the place that they are. So for instance, the one that we're going to have is going to be going between Leo and Virgo. And so it's really going to be like for this Aquarius rising, it would be affecting their seventh and eighth house topics. We also need to consider what Mercury is ruling over. So that Mercury retrograde for an Aquarius rising pretty much always is going to be bringing in their fifth and eighth house topics. Or there's always going to be a potential for those fifth and eighth house topics to come in. Because with any planet who is retrograding, going in retrograde apparent motion, any planet that's doing that, that's a potential for a redirection, a reconsideration, a re-shifting of that focus of that planet. So don't sleep on that. It's a good thing to remember. A good place to start, a good place to consider whenever there's a planet in transit is what are the themes of that planet. So with, again, Mercury retrograde, we often think about communication, travel, exchange of things. And that's good. And then on top of that, what houses is Mercury in charge of? And how is that being brought in and changed or redirected or shifted around? And this is going to come in handy, I think, when we're considering our next Mars retrograde that's going to be happening at the end of 2024. I think we can get pretty riled up about Mars retrograde, especially if you're a day baby like myself. We can get a little worried about them sometimes. But as much as we can think about Mars as conflict or effort or assertion, anything like that, we can also remember that Mars is just the Lord of a place. And so the Mars retrograde that's coming up, very well, it's in December, so it's a little while from now, but very well might just be a redirection and focus of those Mars ruled places like Scorpio and Aries for you. So for this Aquarius rising, it would be like whenever Mars gets retrograde, I think it's like December 6th, a redirecting of the third or the 10th house topics, even just temporarily. So I think those are nice ways to keep it neutral in our mind instead of having it be like, Mars retrograde, something bad about conflict is going to happen, or something bad about separation, or, something like that is going to happen. And we can make it more neutral. So I wanted to bring that up because we do have a Mars retrograde this year. Yeah, and I guess I should say too, sometimes those redirections of a retrograde, sometimes they are temporary, sometimes they are not. Sometimes a retrograde will refocus us or redirect us, and that trajectory will hold even after Mercury or Mars stations direct later on. So not to invalidate, like, yeah, retrogrades can really shift things. Sometimes it's temporary, sometimes it's not. And last little thing. So this was a cute example I had. I had a couple cute examples of the North Node being a confusing influence, which usually for me, it's not cute and I don't love it. Oh, and Zach has a good question. I'll get to your question after this. Yeah, we'll close it out with our philosophical roundtable. So the North Node, it is where the path of the sun and the moon are at the same height in the sky. And so that's how they can start to get in each other's way and we can start to get eclipses. Other times, the sun and the moon's path are off slightly by like 5 degrees. And so we can get partial eclipses too, but usually they're not in each other's way, and we don't see that. But the eclipses are where these paths cross, and the eclipse or the nodes are where these paths cross, and the lunar nodes are, if we think about that, it is like the edge. It feels like the edge of something. And it's where two paths are converging and becoming one. And if we think about what it is when two paths converge and become one, you get the blurring of a line, potentially. You get the blurring of a path. And so I do think that there's something that happens around the lunar eclipse points, the eclipse points, the lunar nodes, that does have something to do with blurring of boundaries and blurring of lines. And I see that. I have to be very careful about that in my own life because I have my moon by the North Node and I see it all the time. How I saw it happen, and now this is a good, and I'm really using myself as an example a lot today. So thank you for those of you who are listening. But maybe this will help you too if you're an Aquarius rising. The North Node has been in Aries. And so for me, this is in my third house of local space, regular spaces, neighbors, neighborhoods, community, communication, regular stuff happening around me in the third house. And when the moon was here, when was this? This was at the end of July, or sorry, the end of June. So funny. So I was at a music festival and I was camping. And there were a bunch of tents around. And me and all these other fellow people had spaced out our tents pretty good. There was a nice situation. We had a really good thing going. And that was the case on Wednesday, on Thursday, which was very rainy, which was funny because the moon was in Pisces with Saturn and it was kind of a drag. It was a slower day. And then on Friday, the morning of Friday, I woke up and there was some other tent right in the middle, really close to everybody else's tents. Like, it was like, man, I see how you saw that was a spot, but that's really blurring the boundaries. Like, your doorstep is right into my tent. And like, yeah, it's fine. I'm cool. I'm chill. No big deal, right? Like, I'm not going to be possessive over space. But it was really funny because I looked at the clock and the moon was with the North Node. And I was like, ah, yes, the blurring of boundaries. Ah, yes, I see, I see. And then on this day as well, unbeknownst to me, back at my home, uh, which I'm very blessed to be renting a property that has a lawn. It's really cool. And I share part of a little strip of it with my neighbor, as you do. And I mow my little part of it and he mows his little part of it. And like we're very like equal about our spacing or whatever. It's fine. I get home and on this day, on Friday, he had actually, it was funny because we had divided it the hot dog way. And he had made the executive decision while me and my partner were gone that he was going to start dividing that shared the hamburger way and plant giant pumpkins all up on his new kind of chunk or whatever. Again, I don't really care. I think it's fine. I hope I get a free pumpkin out of it that maybe I can carve for Halloween. But it was like very much like a changing, a confusing, a blurring of the edges and of the boundaries of things. So I saw two very kind of neutral examples of what the North Node can be. So there you go. So anytime the moon is with the North Node, and I got to memorize it too. There's some cool buying and selling rules around the moon being with the North Node. But for the most part, it's like, all right, if you're doing a deal with someone, if you're communicating something with someone when the moon is with the North Node, you might have to be extra careful in how you communicate that, or you might have to communicate extra to make sure that everything's explicit and there are no misunderstandings, confusions, implicit agreements, implicit things that weren't meant to be implicitly implied or whatever. So yeah, really just crossing your T's and dotting your I's extra whenever the moon is with the North Node. Thought that was a fun story. Okay, so last little thing, and then we'll close shop up for the night. And thank you so much, everyone, for your engagement and help and everything. And I'm really excited now to look at this AstroSeek. This electional thingy engine on there. That's cool. Um, all right. Zachary asks, how do you interact with skeptics who regard astrology with disdain? I love this question because I used to be that person. So there's always hope. There's always hope. I mean, I made it here, but it took me 10 years, 15 years from going from someone who was disdaining astrology to someone who was doing it. So patience, I guess, would be my first one. Yeah, I think we got to call upon Asuda. Uh, the Kathāvatthusutta, which I will link below. And this is where it's like knowing one of the things is like how to have a good conversation. How do you know that you're ready to be in dialogue with someone and have a good conversation? And the Kathāvatthusutta is kind of a way of, it's almost like a nice little checklist to say, all right, now if you meet these requirements, you are ready to have a good conversation with someone that's going to be spiritually more clean. And one of the things is waiting for the right time. And my teacher told an anecdote where someone waited 2 years to say a thing to a friend. And I went like this. 2 years? Are you kidding me? I can't wait 2 days. You know, with certain things to say. So, man, sometimes it is just not the time, even though it feels like the time. So there's that. But I'm going to read this really quick. So, and this is really like, oh yeah, they started out as a skeptic too. Yeah. And that's, I mean, yeah, because they thought the whole system was pop sun sign astrology. Pretty much same. I also kind of felt that too. And I was also a very positivist, materialist. So positivist kind of meaning, I believe the meaning is it's like it's a that word used to make me feel really bad because I used to be one, and now all the astrologers say the word positivist like it's a dirty word, which it kind of is. It's like you demand material evidence for stuff, and if it doesn't have a p value or an n of whatever, then it's not valid. And then there's kind of this material worldview. So, already, just knowing like, oh, well, there's precession and the whole question of the sidereal and tropical zodiac. When I was a skeptic, that was like, immediately my materialist mind was like, oh, well, F it then. It's not even based on the real world. So why would I listen to it? So then right there, the big difference is actually not, it's not so much like, well, it is also, do they have an understanding of what astrology actually is, which the answer is inevitably going to be no, they don't understand that. But there's also a huge difference in values there. And that is where it's like we could argue and go in circles all day long if they have different values. So like for instance, old me used to I guess I don't need the chart up anymore. Old me used to really value only kind of that positivist worldview where it felt like the safest thing to do. I was coming at it from a very threat-based, threat assessment, fear-based approach to life, where it's like, okay, nature's neutral, chaotic. It's not necessarily here to kill me, but it definitely could. So let me try to figure out nature as much as possible so it can't kill me, right? Um, or, just like knowledge is power. The more you understand, the less you fear. And that was always my thing too. The more you understand, the less you fear. And I thought I was very open-minded, but then stuff like astrology would come up, and my limit, my wall was really like, oh, well, is it in the material world? Yes, then cool. Is it spiritual religious? Because I was also anti-theist. I was not only atheist, I was like, theists are causing trouble. I was like, so, I went through that phase. I think a lot of us went through that phase, which I so at the time resented when people would say that too. So you got to wait for the right time. You got to know what their values are. If their values just aren't beyond the material world, then there's nothing that we can say. And what I noticed, the big change in me, and this is going to be different for everyone, but the main change in me was that I began to value things that weren't provable, weren't, and that word is fraught, but weren't evidence-based. I learned to value things that went beyond evidence-based medicine and all of that stuff. So my values started to change. And part of the reason why that was because part of it was like my dad had cancer a few times and he's okay now. He made it past 3 times. I don't know how he's still alive. But I remember like aromatherapy really helping him. And there was like no evidence or data, materially that aromatherapy was helpful, but it just made intuitive sense. Like, yeah, good smells smell good. It makes you feel good when things smell good, right? So that was kind of, the foot in the door, that, okay, not everything has to have a reason. However, if we do know the mechanism of action of something, okay, now I'm going on a whole digression. There's a safety reason behind that. Like, it's good to know how things work. It's good to know the danger and the data behind things so we can be safe about them. But again, if the values are different, it's kind of a non-starter. If the timing is bad, it's a non-starter. You may have to wait 15 years for that person to come around. The Kathāvatthusutta, it's my little checklist. It says, I'm not going to, and I'm paraphrasing, but I'm not going to go into a conversation with hostility, being too sure or arrogant, which, okay, watch this in the other person. So this is where we can start to use these skeptical kind of interactions online. We can start to use them as practice of just seeing these things out there and seeing them in ourselves and seeing them in other people. So you are not suitable for good discussion if there is hostility, too sure or arrogant, ignoble or attacking virtues. That can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. Looking for flaws in others. Now, it's kind of what we're doing here. We're being critically minded, or they are trying to pick apart things. But there's that kind of like when people make a typo or they misspeak about something trivial, not seizing on others' mistakes, like that kind of seeking of flaws. Like, we don't want to be doing that. And if we're doing that and being like, oh, well, you can't even use an apostrophe, right? We already lost. And if they're doing that, they've already lost. Taking glee in others' mistakes or poor speaking, taking glee in others' confusion or defeat. Ignorance and not understanding. Like, I was a really unhappy person in a lot of ways when I was very closed off in my mind and my heart. People suffer when they're like that. And it's also kind of parental for me to even assume that. So we can't assume that people are unhappy or not based with whatever their beliefs have. But also maybe, if someone's ignorant about something or doesn't understand, we can't be, and P.S. Zach, I know you're not doing any of this, but this is for the good reader at home, and what I do. And then, okay, good consult is for the sake of knowledge and clarity. So it's like, the Kathāvatthusutta, are you saying that if I could clarify someone's knowledge, it might be worth having a discussion? Yeah. So if someone is, and granted, I failed at this recently. I made a comment online and I was full of hostility. And I did say things that could have really added a lot of clarity and insight to their criticisms, but I was too hostile and it didn't land then. Even though, yeah, um, I was trying to consult with the idea of for the sake of knowledge. It says, knowing this, an intelligent person can consult without arrogance. So if I'm just trying to explain what is real, at least in my point of view, um, shouldn't need any of the other hostility or anything like that. And then also knowing when the time is right, neither hostile or arrogant, not overly excited. I struggle with that one all the time. Not contemptuous or aggressive. I also struggle with that one. Not with jealousy, only from what they rightly know. And so this is where I see constantly other people speaking from where they clearly do not rightly know. And we can see that in a lot of the skeptics. They didn't do their homework. And we know that. And so if that's where they're coming from, and that's the thing too. If they're showing signs of this, it's probably not a good time for a discussion with them. It depends. You got to feel it out. Agree with what was well spoken. Uh, yeah, not intimidating or crushing the other. So like dunking. I struggle to not dunk sometimes. Um, yeah, those are the main things. So that's a big, tall order, and I rarely meet it. So, however you can go about being as cool as a cucumber out there with the skeptics, I think we need to be, this is my own opinion now, because there's like power dynamics in this too. And I want to name those because the people who are in the materialist, positivist perspective, and the skeptics really essentially, they're in the position of power in the mainstream in society right now. And people who are in this um, more niche kind of subculture, counterculture type of thing as it is right now. Sometimes astrology is the mainstream, sometimes it's not. We're not at an advantage. I mean, there's astrologers get lumped in incorrectly with certain legal statutes that are problematic for us. Even though we're not really, I don't think we're supposed to be under those legal statutes. So there's a power dynamic here that I want to name. At the same time, so I do think like it's good to put ourselves out there, but I also think, and it's asking a lot of us. It's kind of like asking us to be the bigger person. Yeah, there's this weird power dynamic that's going on, or just the overculture and the subculture. Um, and it's asking us to kind of be the bigger person to try to put our best foot forward. But I see too much. It's like people online they're correct about all the astrology stuff. They're like in my nerd camp with me and they're out there. And I've done it too, where we are not nice, very rude, very not welcoming. Like we're not making any friends out there. And so in a lot of ways. So I think we need to stop that. And I'm trying to be good too and on my best behavior, because that's how we get people in. And even when I came over into astrology as a skeptic, I felt so unwelcome, and I still do a lot. And I feel like I don't really get to say this, or I shouldn't be able to say this, because I was part of the kind of overculture mainstream in that part of the power dynamic. And now I'm kind of on the other side, but maybe still on the other side. But I didn't feel welcome because there's a lot of astrologers who are really hostile toward materialists for good reason. They're insufferable and annoying in a lot of ways, especially when they're coming at us or making fortune teller laws that are like erroneously put on us. So I get the hostility, but it makes it really hard to get people on our side as well. And I've had to continually put that aside when I'm seeing people who I really look up to totally shit talking people like me, kind of, who I feel like. And it's so divisive. Like, how can we stop being divisive? Because that's like when I was in sciencey land, this is the last thing I'll kind of say about my experience with it. Um, and I was just recently hearing, what is this, Eric Weinstein? I don't agree with everything he says, but I recently heard him talking about the viciousness of academics, and academics are vicious, and especially medical academics, where it's like people's lives on the line. And if we're incorrect, people actually get really hurt. So it becomes very, very, very serious, very rightfully so. Um, People are vicious, man, in the sciencey lands and the materialist lands when it comes to being correct and incorrect and being just divisive and just so resistant to being open. And again, it's like asking you to be the bigger person, but it sucked coming into woo-woo land and hearing the same shit, different people, same divisiveness, same hostility, same hate in the other direction. So if we can just somehow get through all of these disagreements with skeptics without creating more division and more pushing away, we got to start doing it. Even though they don't deserve the patience from us at all. Totally do not. But yeah. Yeah. So Zach says, in other words, more Venus, Mercury energy, less Mars, Pluto. Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately. And I mean, you know, and this is such a good digression. I don't care that I'm going late, because these are such good conversations to have. And this is something that I'm going to bring up a different time in terms of how we share occult or esoteric knowledge with people, because we're all online. There's nothing esoteric or occult about online, about the internet. None of this is all out in the open. And people are just saying all kinds of stuff where, like, it used to be that these ideas for, I think, a very good reason, because they're so complex in a lot of ways and nuanced and special and sacred that it requires an initiation to get to there. And we're skipping over the initiation. So, man, it's like this whole problem that between like kind of materialist, immaterialist, and that, and different values, and how we come to talking through these kind of disagreements and a lot of misunderstandings. So there's that whole level of stuff. And then it's like, and astrology is this special occult esoteric knowledge that I think requires some kind of initiation to really understand. And that takes time and care and consideration. And I don't see a lot of that happening out there too. And kind of the one that's been coming up a lot is in terms of like the myth of air, the myth of earth, the myth of that, and then all kinds of ideas about like transmigrations of souls, and you chose this life, and how it's like the ideas of like choosing a life, that is like esoteric occult knowledge. Like I think we needed an initiation to understand that, or like, you know, a whole cultural upbringing that a lot of us Western body folks do not have. So how that's a whole other bucket here, is like, man, how do we bring these people in a way that is gentle and respects like the esoteric like wisdom and knowledge that we're messing with here and trying to learn, and but not skipping any initiations along the way. And I think that's part of why it's so hard for like people who are on the outside to look in at astrology and understand it, because there's this whole level of initiation of knowledge and understanding that needs to happen that hasn't happened. So yeah, it's a lot, but I think, you know, we have the internet. Yeah, Kai, everywhere we need to learn how to have difficult conversations again. Yeah, very much. Like, how do we have healthy conflict? And one of my favorite keywords, this is the perfect place to end this. One of my favorite keywords for Jupiter in Gemini is the idea of, if I have a fear, if I am angry, what questions can I ask? You know, and the more questions you ask, the more you understand and the more easy it is to have compassion. So it's like compassionate curiosity. What can I learn about this? Like, if I am so mad, you know, I'm like the old me was like so mad at anti-vaxxers. Oh my God, that was what drove me like to so many changes, because it was driving me insane. Because I was so worried about everything. And yeah, I just had to learn like there's a way to work with like the fear and the anger around that. And the more questions I asked and the more I wondered, like, well, why do they feel that way? Why would they think that way? It's pretty hard to not have compassion. Like it's hard. Like the more you understand, it's like the more you get to know someone, the harder and harder it is to be mad at them. So like asking questions. And this is where I would love if I could just call in all the positivist, materialist people out there who are skeptics to do the same thing. They won't. So we're over here in woo-woo spiritual land, being ahead of the curve. That's the knowledge we have. It's kind of a weird little privilege to have, but it's like, yeah, it's really cool knowledge that we have that unfortunately other people don't. So, in any event, difficult conversations. How do we bring people in? Not be divisive, compassionate curiosity. Yay. All right. Push the like button. Hit the subscribe button if you're listening to this and you like this. Put comments, other questions below this. And I hope everyone has a really great week. I'm actually going to be here tomorrow again at 7 p.m. Same bat place, same bat channel for the July part 2 forecast. We're going to talk about, pretty much July 13th through the end of the month. So be here for that. And then Hellenistic Book Club. We're doing, if you're in Chris Brennan's Hellenistic Astrology course, book club is this Saturday at 1:30 p.m. Central Time. Tomorrow, forecast 7 p.m. Central Time. That's the time zone. All right. Thanks, everyone. Thank you so much for your great contributions and comments. I really appreciate it. And let's all go run to the AstroSeek elections thingy and play with it. All right. Take care, everyone.